The concrete in Georgia's maximum security wing doesn't just hold heat, it holds misery. It's a damp, heavy kind of cold that seeps into your joints by mid-November. The kind that reminds you exactly where you are every time you take a breath. I'm 42 years old. Before I wore this orange jumpsuit, I spent 15 years running a boutique architectural restoration firm in Savannah. My life used to be about symmetry, structural integrity, and restoring beauty to things the world had neglected. I knew how much pressure a beam could take before it snapped. I understood foundations. But foundations don't mean anything when someone digs up the earth from beneath them. 5 years ago, my younger sister, Chloe, was taken from us. She was 22, vibrant, and possessed a gentle soul that didn't belong in a world as harsh as this one. She was working late at a small diner off Route 17 when a low-level enforcer for a coastal trafficking ring walked in. His name was Marcus Vance. He didn't just rob the place. He took Chloe's life out of sheer, callous boredom. Because of a compromised crime scene, a mismatched piece of forensic evidence, and a highly paid defense attorney funded by Vance's syndicate bosses, the murder charge was knocked down. The system we are taught to trust looked at the brutal termination of my sister's future and decided it was worth a mere 7 years for involuntary manslaughter. With good behavior, Marcus would be back on the streets of Atlanta in less than 4. The day the judge handed down that sentence, my father had a stroke right there in the gallery. He never spoke another coherent word before he passed that winter. My mother simply withered away, her spirit entirely broken. I was left alone in an empty house in Savannah, surrounded by blueprints of historical buildings, realizing that the architecture of human justice was fundamentally flawed. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene in the courtroom. When you work with structural design, you learn quickly that screaming at a cracked wall won't keep the roof from falling. You have to study the fracture. You have to find the weak point. Marcus Vance was serving his time at the Blackwood Mountain Correctional Facility up in northern Georgia. It's a bleak, stone fortress surrounded by pine forests that seem to swallow the light. I knew that if he stayed there, he would be protected by his gang, do his easy time and walk out a free man. The state wasn't going to punish him. The universe wasn't going to strike him down. So I decided to build a new framework, one where Marcus and I would finally have our trial. The blueprint of incarceration. It took me 14 months to prepare. A lot of people commit crimes out of passion, anger, or desperation. They act on the first hot impulse that hits their blood, and that's why they get caught, and that's why they lose control of their lives. I didn't want to just hurt Marcus. I wanted to ensure the ledger was completely balanced, and that required absolute icy patience. First, I sold my firm. I liquidated every asset I owned: the office on Broughton Street, my car, my grandfather's gold watch. I moved a total of $340,000 into a secure, blind trust managed by an old college friend, a corporate attorney named David Vance. David didn't ask too many questions when I told him I was taking an extended, off-grid sabbatical to deal with my grief. The trust was structured to pay out a monthly stipend to a local private investigation firm run by a retired state trooper named Arthur Cross. Arthur's job was simple: monitor Blackwood Mountain. I needed to know the guard rotations, the delivery schedules of the food trucks, the specific cell blocks, and exactly which prison gang Marcus had aligned himself with for protection. For months, Arthur sent encrypted files to a secure email address. I studied the blueprints of Blackwood Mountain the way I used to study historical blueprints of coastal mansions. I memorized the blind spots in the recreation yard. I learned that Block C, where Marcus was housed, shared a common cafeteria with the medium security intake wing. Once the architecture of the prison was clear in my mind, I needed an entry ticket. I couldn't just walk in with a weapon. I would be stopped at the gate. I couldn't commit a violent crime outside because the state would send me to a women's facility across the state, far away from Marcus. I needed a non-violent federal-adjacent offense that, based on Georgia jurisdictional agreements, would land me precisely in Blackwood's administrative segregation or mixed security overflow due to overcrowding. I spent 3 months quietly altering the digital financial records of a defunct logistics company I still held nominal shares in. I left a trail of breadcrumbs so obvious, yet technically complex enough to warrant a state-level white-collar task force investigation. I made it look like I had embezzled $112,000 over a period of 2 years, routing the funds through dummy corporations that eventually dissolved into dead ends. On April 12, 2025, the state police knocked on my door. I offered no resistance. I sat at my dining room table, poured myself a final cup of black coffee and held out my wrists. My court-appointed attorney was furious with me because I refused a plea deal that would have given me probation. I stood before the judge, looked him in the eye and accepted a 5-year sentence with immediate placement at Blackwood Mountain due to regional facility allocations. The system thought it was punishing me. In reality, it was providing me with an escort directly to my destination. Part 3. Walking into the shadows. The intake process at Blackwood is designed to strip away your humanity. They take your clothes, your jewelry, your name and your dignity. They spray you down with cold water, hand you a pair of stiff orange scrubs, and stamp a number onto your wrist. But as I walked down the long echoing corridor of the intake wing, listening to the iron doors slam shut behind me, I didn't feel fear. For the first time in 5 years, the constant dull ache in my chest felt manageable. I was finally moving toward the center of the fracture. I was assigned to Block B, bed number 214. It was a small, damp cell shared with a quiet older woman named Evelyn who was serving 20 years for an old drug charge. Evelyn kept to herself, which suited me perfectly. For the first 6 weeks I did nothing but observe. I didn't talk to the inmates. I didn't cause trouble for the guards. I became a ghost in an orange uniform. Every morning during breakfast I would sit at the far corner of the cafeteria, my back against the tiled wall, watching the heavy metal doors that separated Block B from Block C. And then, on a Tuesday morning in late June, I saw him. Marcus Vance hadn't changed. He was bigger now, his arms covered in prison tattoos, walking with the arrogant, unbothered stride of a man who knew his syndicate still protected him even behind bars. He sat at the center table in Block C's section, surrounded by 3 of his associates. He was laughing. That same low, cruel chuckle I remembered from the audio recordings of his police interrogation. He looked completely at home. He believed he had beaten the world. He believed Chloe was just a memory fading into the dirt of a Savannah cemetery. My hand tightened around my plastic spoon, until the cheap polymer snapped in half under my thumb. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a fierce, hot rush of blood screaming at me to stand up, to cross the room, to tear him apart with my bare hands. Take a breath, I told myself. Sit still. Look at the wall clock. I watched the second hand tick by for a full minute. I forced my fingers to relax. A confrontation in the cafeteria would only bring the guards down in seconds. I would be thrown into solitary, my sentence would be extended, and Marcus would be moved to a different block for security reasons. I hadn't sacrificed my life, my business, and my freedom just to give him a split lip and a warning. I needed to wait until the architecture of the situation was entirely in my favor. To get to a man like Marcus, you have to understand his economy. In prison, the currency isn't money, it's leverage, contraband, and information. Through Arthur Cross's outside investigation, I knew that Marcus's primary business inside Blackwood was the distribution of synthetic narcotics through a corrupt night shift guard named Officer Briggs. Briggs was heavily in debt to local sportsbooks in Atlanta, a weakness Arthur had documented extensively before I entered the facility. I began to use my white-collar background to my advantage. I volunteered for the prison library, a low-stakes job that gave me access to the facility's outdated computer system and allowed me to move between blocks under the guise of delivering legal reference materials. Over the next 2 months, I quietly observed Officer Briggs. I noted his patterns, the specific times he took his smoke breaks near the loading docks, and the subtle signals he exchanged with Marcus during the evening headcount. One evening, while delivering a stack of law books to the guard desk in Block C, I waited until the regular sergeant stepped away, leaving Briggs alone. I approached the desk slow, my hands visible, my voice dropping to a calm, professional whisper. Officer Briggs. He didn't look up from his clipboard. Get back in line, convict. Arthur Cross sends his regards. He wanted me to let you know that the $42,000 debt you owe to the offshore account in Costa Rica has been fully settled. The receipts were filed under your home address yesterday morning. Briggs froze. The clipboard fell flat onto the desk. His face went completely pale, his eyes darting around the corridor to see if anyone had heard. He looked at me, his chest heaving, his hands beginning to tremble. Who the hell are you? I'm the person who just bought your peace of mind. And in return I require a single modification to the schedule. On Friday night, during the 11 p.m. shift change, The maintenance corridor behind the old laundry room needs to remain unlocked for exactly 12 minutes. And the security camera covering that blind spot needs to experience a temporary power surge. Briggs swallowed hard, his jaw tight. That's a major violation. If I get caught. If you don't do it. The State Ethics Board receives a complete financial audit of your bank accounts, including the cash deposits from Marcus Vance's associates, by 9 a.m. tomorrow. You won't just lose your job, Officer Briggs. You'll be wearing orange right alongside us. Think about your family. Think about your options. He looked at me for a long, agonizing moment. He saw the absolute lack of fear in my eyes. He realized right then that he wasn't dealing with a desperate criminal. He was dealing with an architect who had already calculated the weight of the entire structure. 12 minutes. Not a second more. Part 5. The alignment of the ledger. Friday night arrived with a heavy pouring rain that lashed against the narrow slit windows of Block B. The sound of the storm was loud, masking the ambient noise of the prison. At 10:45 p.m., Evelyn was fast asleep, her steady breathing filling our small cell. I slipped out of my bunk. Beneath my mattress, I had hidden a crude but effective tool, a 7-inch piece of sharpened steel reinforcement bar that I had quietly salvaged from a broken concrete step near the recreation yard over a month ago. It was wrapped in heavy gray duct tape at the base to form a handle. It wasn't elegant, but it was solid. It was a tool designed for a single, precise function. Briggs kept his word. When the night shift bell rang for the 11 p.m. guard rotation, my cell door clicked open silently, a manual override from the main panel. I stepped out into the dark hallway, moving like a shadow against the concrete. The maintenance corridor behind the laundry room was cold, smelling of old bleach and damp earth. I slipped through the heavy metal door, my heart beating in a slow, rhythmic thud. I wasn't angry anymore. The heat of revenge had burned away months ago, leaving only a cold, mechanical necessity. Marcus Vance was already there. Briggs had lured him into the corridor under the pretense of a late-night contraband drop. Marcus was standing near a stack of industrial washing machines, his back to me, looking impatiently at his watch. "Briggs. Where the hell are you? I don't have time for..." He turned around, and saw me. For a second he didn't recognize me. To him, I was just another anonymous woman in an orange uniform. But then I stepped into the dim light of the single overhead bulb and he saw my face. He saw the eyes of the family he had destroyed 5 years ago in that Savannah diner. His expression shifted from confusion to a sudden, sharp realization. A dark, ugly smirk spread across his face. Well, look who it is. Chloe's big sister. I heard you blew your whole life up over some tax fraud. What's the matter, honey? Couldn't handle the real world. He stepped toward me, his massive frame towering over me, completely unbothered. He thought I was weak. He thought that because the law had protected him outside, he was invincible inside. You think you're gonna do something? Your sister cried just like a baby, you know. Begged for her life. You look just like her when you're scared. He didn't understand that I wasn't scared. I was simply waiting for him to get close enough. When his hand touched my shirt, I moved. I didn't yell. I didn't hesitate. I brought the steel rod up from my side with the full weight of my shoulder behind it, driving it deep into the soft tissue beneath his ribs, angling upward toward his heart. The smirk vanished from his face. His eyes went wide, a sudden choked gasp escaping his throat as the air left his lungs. He stumbled backward, his hands flying to his chest, looking down at the dark blood immediately blooming through his uniform. This isn't revenge, Marcus. This is just gravity, catching up with you. He lunged at me out of pure survival instinct, swinging a heavy fist that clipped my cheekbone, sending a sharp burst of pain through my jaw. I stumbled back against the brick wall, tasting copper in my mouth. But he was losing strength fast. The structural integrity of his body was failing. He fell to his knees, his hands slick with his own blood, staring up at me with an expression that was no longer arrogant. He was terrified. He was looking at the executioner the system had refused to provide. I stood over him, holding the steel rod steady. I didn't look away. I watched the light leave his eyes slowly, minute by minute, until his body went entirely limp against the concrete floor. The silence that followed was absolute. The storm outside seemed to fade into the background. I reached down, pulled the tool from his chest and laid it neatly beside his hand, making it look like a gang-related dispute over contraband. I took a piece of cloth from my pocket, wiped my hands and turned back toward the maintenance door. The 12 minutes were up. The architecture was complete. The investigation into Marcus Vance's death took 3 months. Because of the gang affiliations he maintained, the administration immediately classified it as a targeted hit by a rival syndicate inside Block C. Officer Briggs, terrified of his own exposure, maintained the story that the security camera failure was a routine technical glitch due to the severe storm that night. My name was never brought up. I returned to my cell, returned to the library, and returned to being a ghost. I served the remainder of my sentence in absolute peace. I was released from Blackwood Mountain 3 weeks ago. I am back in Savannah now. I don't have my firm anymore, and the house on Broughton Street belongs to someone else. I live in a small, quiet cottage near the salt marshes off Tybee Island, where the only sound at night is the wind shifting through the sea grass. People often talk about revenge like it's a fire that consumes the person who holds it. They say that looking for justice outside the system will leave you broken, empty, and lost. But they don't understand structural design. They don't understand that some foundations are so rotten, the only way to save the building is to tear the bad timber out with your own hands. I don't feel guilt. When I look at the photograph of Chloe that sits on my mantelpiece, her smile doesn't feel heavy anymore. The shadow that followed her memory for 5 years has finally lifted. She can rest because the person who took her future didn't get to walk away from his consequences. The world rewards the patient person. It rewards the individual who is willing to walk away from the door, sit in the truck and plan before they act. True strength isn't loud. It isn't a fist thrown in anger or a scream in a courtroom. It's the quiet calculation of a sister who loved her family enough to build a cage around her own life, just to ensure that the truth was finally settled. The marsh is quiet tonight. The tide is coming in, washing over the sand, clearing away the old tracks. My name is Georgia. My ledger is clean. And for the first time in a very long time, I am completely free.